name is Beck and I am going to be doing a wrap up today of all of the books that I read in March and April. Unfortunately, I didn't really read that much in March, but I kind of made up for it in April. I did the Owls Readathon, which is a Harry Potter themed readathon for the Owls exams, and it meant that I read a book for every prompt that I had an unread book for, so it was quite successful. I read 8 books for that, and then I read about 2 to 2.5 books in March. So I definitely came back with a win in April compared to March, but hopefully that streak continues and I haven't burned myself out reading. So the first book that I read in March was Class A by Robert Muchamore, and this is the sequel to The Recruit, which is a series set around James, who is a child spy, and he's called a cherub agent, and these agents go off to basically unearth criminals because nobody suspects them because they're children. And so in this one, James is going off to become part of a fake family to settle in the same town as a drug dealer who has made a almost international drug ring and is making a lot of money doing a lot of bad things, and so it's his job to try and uncover it. He's got a few characters with him that we've seen in the previous book, and because this is middle grade, it's kind of like Alex Rider. This is one of the series that I read when I was like 14 from my school library. I've been revisiting them just because I've loved reading them. They're very, very quick to read. They're very digestible as well, and the main character, James, is a jerk, to be perfectly honest. He's a jerk, but I like the characters around him, and I like that his character has moments of tenderness. The reason I haven't stopped reading this is because while James is not an wholly likable character, he is a character that you see grow, and he is like a 14 or 13-year-old boy, so he's going to get up to mischief, he's going to say things he's not going to mean, he's going to regret things, and he's going to grow more. So I really like this series. I like seeing James grow, I like seeing his sister Lauren grow as well, and I like seeing the relationships of all the cherubs with each other as they go through all of these dire situations. I guess it kind of links to my love of found family in a sense, because these cherubs mostly, they don't really have any parents, they're mostly orphans and stuff, or at least James is, and so it's nice to see him build relationships with characters that he encounters. So yeah, this is nostalgic, it's fast paced, it's really easy to love. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars and I'm really excited to continue. I don't have the next book on me, but my birthday is coming up in May, so I might have to just go and buy it. The next book I read was actually an audiobook, and it is the sequel to Kings of the Wild, and it is Bloody Rose, but this book is more of a companion than a direct sequel, so characters from Kings of the Wild do show up in here, but it follows a different character altogether, and her name is Tam, and she is a girl who works at a tavern, and one day she gets poached basically to become the bard or the musician for this legendary crew, and I can't say much more than that. Obviously Bloody Rose is on the front, so it has kind of throwbacks to the first book, but I don't want to get into the plot too much because it'll get into spoilers of what happens at the end of the first book. This, like the first one, had a huge quest dynamic in it for the plot, but because it didn't have Clay's narration like the first book, I don't know what stopped me from connecting with it so much. I think it was the fact that his voice was lacking. That said, I did like the characters in here and I like the relationships, but when stuff went down with them and when things happened, it didn't elicit an emotional response in me, but I did empathize with what was going on. So it was a 4 out of 5 stars for that reason. I liked the characters, I liked the plot, even though it seemed to go from like A to B to C to D. That's what the first book did as well, but I think because I liked the character dynamic more in the first book, I liked the way that the first book went, whereas this one seemed to drag on a little bit to place to place to place, because this band of mercenaries is very much on the road going towards this be-all and end-all quest that is like the opposite direction to where they should be going, and so they get a lot of outward judgment from that. And I don't know, I just struggled to see tension form. I did like the main character Tam. I like how she grew, and I like how she was embarrassed at the start, and she was just a very trip over your own feet kind of character, but she really found herself in this book. So I liked Tam's narration, I liked the character dynamic that brought to the story, but I think I just liked the first book better. So it still gets a 4 out of 5 stars, and I think I gave the first book 4 out of 5 as well, but it was a little bit of a lower 4 out of 5 stars compared to Kings of the Wild. I don't know if that makes any sense, but to me, the way I felt, it makes sense. The next book that I read is The Archive by Victoria Schwab, and this is one of her more underhyped books, and it is more of like a younger young adult. It's not middle grade, it's older than middle grade, but it's for a younger end of young adult, and I don't have any notes written for this book, so this is going to be interesting to talk about. I did talk about it more in a reading vlog for the beginning of April, so if I remember, I'll link it in the corner. This is about a girl named Mackenzie, and her grandfather has passed the torch to her effectively, and she can now cross into what is called the archive, and that is where people go after they pass away, and it's kind of like a record of human souls, I guess, and sometimes archives escape, and so they get into the place that's kind of in between the waking world and the archive, and that is what Mackenzie is in charge of keeping clear. So she has to capture the people that escape into this in-between world and put them back into the archive and back to rest. And she is called a keeper, and there are multiple keepers, but she has a piece of archive paper, and whenever she receives a name and an age on that paper, that means that somebody has escaped and she has to go and return them to the archive. Her grandfather knew about this, but her parents don't, so it seems to them like she keeps sneaking off, and they kind of let that slide a little bit because the family have recently experienced a tragedy. So her younger brother Ben has passed away and he's 11. So they've uprooted their entire house, they've moved somewhere else, and they're trying to start a new life. And so this book deals a lot with mortality and grief and overcoming that grief. And I really like those themes, which is why I keep going back to V.E. Schwab, because she tends to touch on those themes quite a lot. I especially know with Addie LaRue she's going to do that, and that comes out at the end of 2020. So it's about a character who makes a deal with the devil and then can't die. So she and the devil are the only constants in each other's lives, and she has to watch everything pass her by. So V.E. Schwab really plays with this theme and inevitability of passing away and what that does to people and how to cope with it. And that's what I mostly liked about this, but the thing that let me down was the love interest. It didn't seem to need it except for a particular plot element, and I have a little bit of a problem with that. I can see how she's grown more, not out of it, but grown as a writer around that now, because this is one of her more early works. But in this book it didn't particularly work for me. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I could have given it a 5 out of 5 if the romance wasn't so against the main character and her characterization, because the decisions she made seemed to be fairly snap, but the rest of the decisions she made seemed to be more thought through. So it just didn't really gel with me, but it had to work out kind of for the plot. And I'm being vague on purpose because I don't want to give things away. But yeah, 4 out of 5 stars. Enjoyed it. Want to continue on, but I'm not in a huge rush because I don't believe that the publisher is on very good terms with V.E. Schwab, and they have repackaged and republished this as a bind-up to maintain the rights on it, so V.E. Schwab can't write the 3rd book yet. So it's a little bit of argy-bargy. I might just borrow it from a library or from a friend or something, but I do want to continue the series. I did like this book, and that's where I'm going to leave this. So the next book I read is Blue Exorcist Volume 8. Obviously I can't say what Volume 8 is specifically about, but this series follows a character named Rin, and he is a young boy who is half demon, half human, and I think his father is Satan. He can wield blue fire, and he's trying to keep that a secret, and his older brother knows this. I don't think they have any parents to speak of. They have a grandfather. I'm not sure if he's still alive or not. It's been a little while since I read the earlier volumes of this, but this involves one of my absolute favorite tropes, which is a magical school. So they have to go off to this demon slaying academy and hide the fact that Rin is half demon from his classmates. All the while he's trying to train and become the best hunter he can and try and control the demon part of him, while his brother protects that and tries to keep the secret as well. This particular volume follows a demon who is trying to take over Kyoto City, and so the demon hunters have to stop that from happening. But that is all I can really say about the plot elements of this, so I'm going to have to pivot really hard into my feelings about it, because I think this is the volume, like I said in my Owls blog, that I'm going to stop reading this series on, because while the premise was really cool and I love the demon element and I love the academy element to this, it just kept following typical character archetypes when it came to manga, and I've read a bunch of different types of manga. I've grown up with manga, so they're more easy for me to spot and harder for me to excuse now that I've read a couple. So because of this reason, it didn't really subvert or deviate from these particular archetypes, and that's the same thing I find frustrating in fiction. That's why I stopped reading this. I was kind of worried that might happen. I was kind of giving this one a chance to see if it would continue the way it has, and it did. So the only plot that I was really interested in was Rin's brother in here, because he has the beginnings of an interesting story that is starting to unfold, but I don't really care about anyone else. And because this is such a wide spread of characters that it follows, it can get quite choppy at points, and I don't want to bother reading about all of the other characters when I can just read about his brother, and I know that it's going to take so many volumes for his brother's story to unfold. So I think I'm going to stop here and save a bit of my money, but I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. It was a decent volume. I really like the art style, but for the story and plot and the character, it's not really for me anymore. Next up, I ended up reading a middle grade, and that is Maya and the Rising Dark, and I ended up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars. I initially thought it was going to be a 5 out of 5 because the plot seemed to be particularly intriguing. So it's about Maya, and she's 11 or 12 years old, and she's at school one day doing her class when suddenly all the color bleeds from the world, and nobody else seems to have noticed the fact that it did, because everyone seems frozen, and then everything snaps back to normal and Maya is left wondering what the hell just happened. It did start off with the potential of magic and intrigued, but then it ended up pivoting really hard into talking heads explaining everything in dialogue. And I don't like it when world building is explained in dialogue. At the beginning there was a scene with Maya and some mythical creatures, and it was a really interesting way to investigate the magic system first of all, Maya's character, Maya's friends, and the monsters that were in this world. It had kind of like a pinch of what I liked in Percy Jackson, and that's why I thought I would like this as it, bloomed into a story, but it ended up just going from place to place to place, and it had action after action, which would have been cool, but the way that it was done, it was so fast you kind of got whiplash when you were expecting a little bit of character growth, because the action was so fast that I felt you didn't really get much time to spend with the characters and their reactions to this, and it just seemed to be fairly surface, and I was really struggling to deep dive into empathizing and understanding and enjoying the character work going on here. So I did like the potential of this, and I liked that all of the characters were 11 or 12 years old, so they were quite young, and there were parents present in here, which I don't see a lot of in a book. So I liked that there were parents and guardians that were there to enforce boundaries and protection but not hold the characters back from things, but the way that it was executed was just a little bit short for me. It just fell a little bit short, so that's why I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. I wanted it to be more. This cover is absolutely gorgeous, but unfortunately it just didn't hit for me, and I'm so disappointed that it didn't. And then next I listened to an audiobook by Libba Bray. I'm slowly making my way through her audiobooks. So I listened to Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray, and I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. Really enjoyed this one. I really like the narration of it. And this follows a series of people who fall ill with the sleeping sickness, so it's probably not best to read in a pandemic like I did, so wouldn't recommend, but it was a good book. So the characters that fall sick and end up passing away from the sleeping sickness kind of form the background of the current characters that we follow. So it's something that's happening in their city and in their world, but it's not something that is pivotal until the very end of the book. But I didn't mind that. It didn't really feel drawn out because I like all of the characters that we follow. I can't say too much about who we follow and what's going on because it'll obviously spoil the first book, but Evie is one of them. She was the main character effectively in the first book, and she is a clairvoyant and she can touch objects and read their histories. And in Lair of Dreams you encounter more diviners and you get more interaction of the characters who are diviners with their different powers, which is cool. And in Lair of Dreams you have 2 dreamwalkers, Henry and Lynn, and it's really interesting to hear from their perspectives, especially since the book is set in the 1920s, because both of them are from racial minorities, and the way that Libba Bray writes racism in her book is very, very realistic, but it's also not glorified at all. It's done very, very carefully, but it's done in a way that blends seamlessly into the story and character, and I love the way that the characters stepped up for each other. I love the way they looked out for each other. I love the way that the surrounding characters also look down upon the people who are all for white America. It was just such a well done book, and the fact that it had a pandemic and racism in it was just really relevant to what we're experiencing with the pandemic. It was just a really topical book to read at this time of the pandemic, but I really liked the character work, I liked the plot, and I like how everything culminated at the end in the sleeping sickness and the dream walking and all the diviners coming together, because if you're following one character you're bound to see another in the same chapter. So the fact that it was multiple perspective, followed a bunch of diviners, I didn't mind, because you were bound to run into all of the characters at some point anyway, so it didn't really leave me waiting. I wasn't skipping over things to get to the characters that I really wanted to see, and that's why I've continued straight on to reading the 3rd book, although I haven't finished it yet. So I am listening to Before the Devil Breaks You. I'm planning on reading King of Crows this month in May, so I'm really liking the series. It has got 4 stars so far from me, and that's probably what the 3rd book will be as well. So it's just a really enjoyable series, especially on audiobook. I know a lot of people tout the audiobook, but it is genuinely quite good. So if you can get onto the series, then I would recommend the audiobook. But I did give Lair of Dreams 4 out of 5 stars, and yes, I am looking forward to continuing. Next up, I read a book that I was hoping to enjoy more, and it is The Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the 2nd Witcher book. It's technically the 2nd Witcher book because it's the 2nd compendium of short stories, but it's not the 1st book in the set of novels that make up the series. So I believe you're supposed to read The Last Wish, and then you're supposed to read this, and then you're supposed to read Blood of Elves, which is the novel that follows Geralt. Whereas these are short stories that follow Geralt haphazardly through different timelines. And I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, and I was kind of disappointed by it. In general, I don't usually like short stories, and I think The Last Wish was a little bit of an outlier because I gave that a 4 out of 5, and I really genuinely quite enjoyed all of the stories in it. This one really took a lot of time to lift off, and even when it did, I was a bit skeptical of things. In the first story here, we follow Geralt, who is part of this group that's just been randomly thrown together. He kind of stumbles across them, and they are going up a mountain to slay a dragon. And this happened in the TV show as well, but I think I like the rendition in the TV show more than I liked it in the book. It just seemed like a lot of talking heads, a lot of flowery and almost unnecessary at times dialogue, and it took a long time to get to the point when it's supposed to be a short story, and if you want to get to the point, you want to get to it fast to hold your reader's attention because you don't have a lot of space and time to execute your story. So I found it quite slow to start, and it took me a little while to get through the rest of the short stories after this as well. It did detail more of Yennefer and Geralt's relationship in here, and that's what I wanted, and Ciri did appear in here as well, and she appeared in a similar manner to the way the show did it, but she's a lot younger than the characters in the show, and I think the show really set up unrealistic expectations of the way the main female characters are written in here, because in the show they're quite stoic and strong, and yes, they have emotion, but it's not blown out of proportion, whereas in here I found the characters to be quite whiny and overtly emotional, and you can just tell that this is a fantasy that's written in like the 90s. So that's really my major frustration point in this book. Yes, Ciri makes sense, the fact that she's whiny because she's quite young. So she's a little girl, she's not been outside of the castle, she's a princess, and so she's been pampered. So that makes sense. But when it comes to Yennefer, talking around the things that she has an issue with, alluding to things rather than communicating properly, and then getting upset and frustrated with Geralt when he doesn't understand what he means, and him doing the same thing to her, like vice versa. Very, very frustrating. Just say what you mean, get to the point, and stop talking around things so that the reader can follow, because that's what I really found frustrating about this book, that it kind of led me around in circles and then didn't explain the circle. And there was also a short story in here that was just about Geralt and this sorcerer fighting over the affections of Yennefer, which I found to be ridiculous. Like, they're not 15, they're immortal beings. Can we have a conversation? I just found that ridiculous. So that is a short story that got like 2 stars for me. Overall, this was a 3 out of 5 though. I do plan on continuing with The Blood of Elves, but after loving The Last Wish and thinking I'd love this as well, I don't think I have the same expectation anymore, so I'm just going to take my time. I do plan on reading Blood of Elves, but I haven't got it. I don't own it. I mean, my birthday's coming up and I was going to buy it for my birthday, but I might just put the series on hold until I can get back into it again. At the moment, I'm not really struck by this need to start and finish the rest of the series, but I'm sure that will surface again later when I've got a bit of distance. So 3 out of 5 stars, will eventually continue at some point, not a priority. Next up, I read Attack on Titan, Volume 8, and I think this is my first 5-star book of this wrap-up. I accidentally put Volume 8 of this and Volume 8 of Blue Exorcist on my Owls reading pile, and I did that completely by accident, but it turns out that I DNF'd one series and I'm absolutely enamored by this one, which is very lucky because manga is expensive and I've already bought 8 volumes of this, so I hope it was going to be good. The main things you need to walk away with understanding it and wanting to pick it up is that it follows Eren, and Eren doesn't really remember his past. He's growing up in this city that is walled off, and there are kind of like soldiers or corps that have to patrol this city and keep it safe, because from the outside there are these titans that try and break in and eat the people. So it's a very fantasy apocalyptic book in that sense. There's a huge survival aspect in here, and it's kind of gory and bloody, but it's really, really cool. I love the art style in here. There were a few action panels in here and they were drawn very, very well. You get the movement and you understand them easily. And when it came to character and morality, there was a really interesting conversation at the start of here. I didn't think that I would get back into this because I've had a little bit of a break with the series, and I picked it up without reading any Wikipedia or anything to catch me up on where we were at. But as soon as the characters started talking again, I was like, I remember where you are, I remember what's going on, I know you, I like you. So it was a really good sign, the fact that I got straight back into it. So it is quite a dark book. It doesn't really shy away from the goriness of the world and the survival and the corruption of the world as well. So if that's not really your cup of tea, then this gets quite dark. So probably have something that you can watch or experience that is kind of cute and fluffy, so that you don't have to just live in this headspace of it being really dark and morose. But I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to continue. I have volumes 9 and 10 already owned on me, so I'm probably going to read those in May, even though they're not in my TBR whatsoever. I just really enjoyed this. I'm really glad that I continued on reading, because I was kind of on the fence because I'd had a few 4 and 3 stars in the series, but this really brought it back for me. So really, really looking forward to this. I found the ending a little bit not cliffhangery, and I was expecting a really big cliffhanger, but there was some things delivered in the plot of the 2nd or 3rd chapter, and there are 4 chapters a volume, that really, really hooked me, and I thought something was going to be completed, like plot-wise, but it wasn't. It was continued, but in a really interesting way, and I love it when you can kind of get plot whiplash, but in a really good way, and that definitely did that to me. So 5 out of 5 stars. Loved it. Will definitely continue. It was amazing. Please read this manga. Next up, at some point I read this for the Owls, but this is not in any particular order because I probably read it before a bunch of these books. But anyway, it is The Willful Princess and the Piebald Prince by Robin Hobb. This is a small novella set in her Elderlings universe, but you don't have to read it in order to read Assassin's Apprentice, the Farseer trilogy, Live Ship Traders, etc., because I've read all of those and I didn't read this first. So in the Assassin's Apprentice and the following books, there are two types of magic. One is the skill and one is the wit, and the skill is usually passed down through royal bloodline, and it's a mental telepathic magic. It has a few different nuances to it, but that's the bare bones of it. And there's an alternate version, which is the wit, which have communication in the same way but with animals. So it's a telepathic animal magic. Often characters will connect with an animal and it will be like they're familiar, and they might take on a trait or two that makes them a little bit more like their creature that they're connected with. So because of that nuance to it, it was frowned upon and is now exiled, and you will probably get hanged or run out of the city if you are known to have wit magic, because it's considered really dirty and gross, and you don't know why it happened, but it explains it in this book. And I really like the fact that we got something else in the Elderlings world that I hadn't read before, because I forgot how much I love Robin Hobb's writing. So before we see Fitz in the Assassin's Apprentice, this is many, many years beforehand, and we are following Caution Farseer, and she is a princess who is not like her namesake whatsoever, and she falls in love with a stable boy. And I don't want to talk about too much about what happens in the plot, because it's more character work in here than plot work, even though they do rely on each other and there is a good balance of it in here. We follow the princess in this romance that's kind of forbidden through the eyes of her handmaid, and it's kind of messed up how her handmaid tries to mirror the princess's life so she can maintain her position as the handmaid. It was just a really interesting and messy way to reflect on politics, and I'm not usually into politics whatsoever, only if they're done really well and only if I'm invested in the characters that they're about. And Robin Hobb has this uncanny way of hooking me into her characters, and I didn't think it would happen with something this short, but it did. And I like the first half of this more than the second, but I did overall enjoy it quite a lot. I can't give it a 5 stars because I felt a little bit distant from it in the second half. I'm not sure why, but I think the character work was better in the first half. So I'm giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. As always, Robin Hobb is one of my favourite authors. I am super psyched to eventually do a reread of the entire Elderlings series, but at the moment I'm putting it off because I want to start the Wheel of Time, so it's on the cards eventually. But just know that I love Robin Hobb, I love her series. This was a really, really enjoyable installment, and if you haven't read it yet, I would recommend it. It's also a really good way to see whether you like Robin Hobb's writing, because it's small and bite-sized and her character work is excellent. So if that's something that might pique your interest, go for it. I also finished Scotch Dragons by Amy Kaufman, and most of this book was a 3 stars, but then the ending brought it up to a 4, and I talked more about this in a reading vlog, so if you want more thoughts fresh, because I literally finished it in the vlog and then talked about it immediately after I finished it, I will link that in the corner or down below. But this is the sequel to Amy Kaufman's Ice Wolves, and I've been pretty good at reading sequels recently because I want to get stuff off my reading list, and if I'm finishing series, that means that I'm succeeding. So I finished this and I gave it a 4 because the ending had some excellent character work in it and it made me emotional, which was awesome. But I can't really say the way that this was built up to that moment. I can only kind of vaguely tell you how I felt about it, because obviously if I tell you what happens in here, it's spoilers for Ice Wolves. So Ice Wolves is the first book. It follows Anders and his twin sister Raina, and they are living orphaned on the streets. Usually there are ceremonies in the town that have shape-shifting, and the people who end up successfully shape-shifting are brought into the academy because there are ice wolves, they are studying at academy. Yes, my favourite trope, a magical academy. Who'd have thought, right? So Raina and Anders accidentally become part of this ceremony, and one of them ends up shape-shifting into an ice wolf, which is Anders, and then one of them shapeshifts into a Scorch Dragon, which is Raina. And after that point, they get separated because throughout history, no sibling has ever shapeshifted into either or. It's always been blood relatives with the same clan, and Ice Wolves and the Scotch Dragons have a feud, and this blood feud has been going for a while now, more than 10 years, but the threads haven't really been broken for them to go to war yet. So they're very, very much on thin ice. And in the first book, Anders is trying to do his classes, learn how to be an ice wolf, and then track down his sister because obviously they got separated and he wants to reunite. So that's what the first book follows. In this book, obviously it's called Scorch Dragons. It follows Raina a little bit more. So that's really all I can give you about this story, but I liked the fact that this was about bridging differences, and I like the friendships that were formed in this book as well. And I like that it was very much much the kids versus adults. So I won't say anything more than that, but I'm really looking forward to the third book because I think it's coming out in June, which is not a very long wait. So I'm glad I picked this up in time. Also, side note, I don't know if you can actually see it, but I'll try and zoom in. But on the spine, there is a little flame that's got number 2 on it, which is just awesome because the amount of times I'm in a bookstore and I don't know what part of a series the book is. This is just perfect. I wish more books did this. Anyway, that was a side note. Moving on. And then I've only got 2 more books to talk about, and they are very much outside my wheelhouse because I read these for different prompts in the Owls Readathon that were very much outside my comfort zone. And I'm glad that I did because I gave one of them a 5 stars and I gave one a 4. So I read All the Rage by Courtney Summers. I actually read her other book, Sadie, on audiobook around the same time last year, and so it felt fitting that I put this into the Owls Readathon for this year. But this is about Romy Gray, and she is a girl who has suffered something in the past, and now her family are very much against the sheriff's family because they covered it up. And it's very much a small town vibe where everyone kind of knows this secret, but also Remy doesn't want everyone to know so that she can maintain her life as she wants to as a normal girl and kind of separate the trauma that happened to her and ignore it as part of her identity. So it was a really interesting book when it came to rape culture and sexual assault and believing victims and bullying, because Remy gets a lot of bullying. She gets slut-shamed quite a lot, and the plot follows a girl who ends up going missing. And I had a few problems with this book, but I wanted to rate it high because of the subject matter, so it was a little bit of a fight mentally for where this would end up sitting, but I settled on a 4 stars because the subject matter was important and interesting, and I really like the way Courtney Summers investigates it through characters that are not necessarily lovable or likable. And Romy definitely was a frustrating character, but I like that she gave an extra nuance to the voice of investigating it. I think if she was more of a heroic character, I wouldn't have had so much thoughts about this book. I wouldn't have connected with it a lot more. I think if it was a heroic character, I would have given it like a 3 stars instead of a 4. So Romy really made me interrogate it mentally, but she also had problems. So her narrative style was quite frustrating. I remember talking about this in, again, a reading vlog because I talked about it directly after I'd read it, so it made more sense to me then, and I didn't take notes. So I'm really helping myself in this wrap up, aren't I? So I was talking about the narrative style. I found that Romy was doing things and saying things and then mentally wanting to do different things or not agreeing with the things that she was doing, and she kind of led people on and she wasn't direct, and then she'd do really rash things and you'd see her doing it and you'd be like, why are you doing this? What's going on? And I found that there was very much an elephant in the room when it came to her past trauma, and it just wasn't really addressed and was talked around quite a lot in the book, and I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to have guessed what this past trauma was and whether people were supposed to know, like the other characters in the town were supposed to know. Obviously her parents knew and she knew, but it took me a while to catch on to that, and it's placed very obviously in the book, so I'm assuming that I'm supposed to know. But the fact that things were talked around for pretty much 99% of the plot and it only gets addressed at the very end, I found that quite frustrating as a reader because it disconnected me from the book, it disconnected me from the character. And if it was just talked about a little bit earlier, I would have clicked a little bit more, it would have made the penny drop a little bit more, and it would have made me understand Romy a little bit more, honestly. So that's why I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The plot was interesting and the character of Romy was frustrating and good. I liked reading about that, and the subject matter was really deep and dark as well. So those were the positives of it, but the plot at the end and the character work at the end was quite frustrating to me. I found the plot made sense and thematically it made sense, but literally in the last chapter characters do something that seemed like a 180, and that really frustrated me, because if a character has been built up by that point to the end of the book and then you do something that doesn't really fit that character anymore, I'm going to be like, why did that happen? And that's what I was like. So that's my very, very vague thoughts about this book. I'm sorry if they're vague. I can't really go into obviously details because it's the last chapter in the book that I had the most thoughts about, but it was a 4 out of 5 stars. It was a good book. I liked it, but it was a tough book as well. So that's all I have to say. And then lastly, I read a really fun book and I'm so happy that I finished it, and it's Only Mostly Devastated. It is a retelling of the musical Grease and it has a male love interest. It also has a cancer subplot with Ollie's aunt, and Ollie is the main character. So if that's something that is upsetting to you, I know it made me emotional, but I was okay reading this. Just a warning, because I didn't realize the extent of the cancer plot before I went into this, and I thought it was just going to be a cute and fluffy book, but it was a cute and fluffy book that also made me emotional. So it was a really good book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. So we follow Ollie, and he has had a summer romance with a boy named Will, and he is also having to start at this new school because his parents want to stay and help his Aunt Linda and her kids, because obviously she's got cancer and is going through chemo and stuff. So they go home, move all their stuff, stay in this town for the year, and that means that Ollie is doing effectively his senior year together at a school that he doesn't really know anybody at. And so on his first day, he meets these girls, and they're basically the pink ladies in Greece. They all have the same necklace, and he tells them about this summer romance that he had with this guy, and then one of the girls gets really cold shouldery with him and really touchy about it. And it turns out that Will is not out at this school, and he just outed him to Will's friends. So it's very much about the relationship that Ollie and Will have, and it was a coming out story in a sense, but it was a very well done one in the sense that Ollie never pressured Will to come out. Ollie never pressured things that he didn't expect from Will because he'd already been through all of this himself. And I like the fact that Ollie was very self-aware and he let Will come to his own sensibilities and realizations about his sexuality without pressuring him to do certain things in social situations. And it was just a really well done, detailed book, and it had characters who were bisexual and gay and a decent spread of a bunch of different sexualities, and all of them were handled really well. I love the way that characters in here really stepped up for each other. It was a really positive book. Yes, it did make me emotional. There were sad things in it, but I think that made it really well rounded. If that subplot wasn't in there, then I don't think I would have given it the 5 stars that I did, because it really showed Ollie's emotional range. It also showed his family, and it showed his relationships and his friends. It was just a really well formulated book. It had pieces of each part of his life as a 17 to 18-year-old boy, and he thought the way a 17 to 18-year-old boy would think and did the things that that age would do. And I just really liked it. It seemed honest, it seemed very raw, and it also seemed very tender as well. And it was just really sweet, honestly. So I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Really happy that I read it because I received it from a publisher just by surprise, and I didn't expect to like it whatsoever because it's so much outside my wheelhouse. I'm usually here talking about like adult high fantasy, and here I am talking about a Greece retelling of YA. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. 5 out of 5 stars. So that concludes all of the books that I read in April and March. Have you read any of these? Please do let me know. I'm really struggling with holding. Oh, there we go. I read so much, and I'm still behind on my Goodreads goal. I'm like 4 or 5 books behind, and I want to read 100 this year. I did also mention in my last Owls reading vlog that I had 41 books on my reading pile. I was hoping, almost dropped them. I was hoping to get that number to 40 by reading Only Mostly Devastated on the top, but that wasn't actually clocked on my Goodreads, so I still have 41 books left. So I'm hoping that I can get under 40 in May. We'll see how we go. But these are all the books I read. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll chat to you down in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all of that cool stuff. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in my next video. Bye.